The prairie was dying under a sky the color of tarnished steel. Wind moved across the fields like an animal with no home, dragging the smell of old rain and rusted nails. When Silas Vane rode through that wind, he looked like the last man left alive, hat pulled low, coat torn from years of hard miles, eyes fixed on a crooked house, sitting alone in the valley. He'd bought it for $1. A single coin slid across a courthouse counter in Abilene. Folks laughed when he signed the deed, said the place was cursed, said every man who'd tried to fix it had vanished or drunk himself to death. Silas didn't laugh. Men like him didn't believe in curses. They believed in bargains. And $1 for 100 acres sounded like a bargain made in heaven. Or maybe held out the porch, cried under his boots as he climbed it. Paint had peeled down to the bone. A dead hawk hung from a beam by twine, spinning in the breeze. Warning sign, he muttered. But warnings didn't stop a man who'd buried his whole family before 40. He pushed the door. It fought him, swollen wood, hinges screaming. When it opened, the house exhaled, a long breath of mildew and dust that tasted like forgotten sins. Inside was ruin. Broken chair, collapsed table, an oil lamp on its side, wick black, but fresh. The strangest thing was the silence, not the empty kind, but the hell-breath kind, as if something down below was listening. Silas lifted his lantern. The light licked over wallpaper curled like old skin, over boot marks pressed into dust. Fresh boot marks, not more than a week old. They led to a torn rug. Beneath that rug, the faint outline of a trapdoor. He knelt, fingers brushing the groove. His nails scraped old wood until a nail popped, then another. The hatch groaned open. From the darkness rose a smell thick with copper and sweat. The flame trembled, then movement. A whisper. Chains clinking like a snake's rattle. Silas lowered the lantern and froze. There, in the hollow beneath the floorboards, was a girl. Her eyes caught the light first, wide, wild, unblinking. She was thin as a reed, skin ghost white under grime. Around her ankles, chains bit deep. Beside her, a revolver loaded. In her hand, a silver locket gleamed. She tried to speak, but her throat failed. Easy now, Silas said, voice rough as gravel. Ain't here to hurt you. The girl shrank back, the chains rattling louder. Thunder cracked above, shaking loose dust from the rafters. The old house groaned like something waking up. Who did this? Silas asked. Her lips moved, barely a whisper. They'll come back. Outside, lightning forked across the horizon, white and violent. For a heartbeat, Silas saw the valley lit up fences, graves, and the ghost outline of hoofprints leading away from the farm. He looked back down at her, the trembling hands, the fear, the locket. He didn't know who they were, but he knew the look in her eyes. He'd seen it before, in mirrors, and in the faces of people who had survived monsters wearing badges. The wind slammed the shutters shut, and Silas Vane realized this farm wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. The storm broke before dawn, tearing through the valley with a howl that could wake the dead. By the time Silas got the girl out of that cellar, the rain was coming down in sheets. He wrapped her in his old trail coat, carried her to his horse, and rode hard through mud that sucked at the hooves. The farmhouse disappeared behind them, swallowed by lightning flashes and the smell of thunder. His cabin sat 5 miles east, tucked against a ridge of black rock. Smoke still rose from last night's coals, proof he hadn't yet given up pretending life was ordinary. When he kicked the door open, the wind followed them inside like a ghost that refused to stay out. He laid her on his cot by the fire. She didn't say a word, didn't even blink as he cut the chain from her ankle with a hammer and chisel. Each strike echoed like a gunshot. She flinched, but didn't cry. Her wrists were ringed in red, rope burns deep as old scars. When the metal snapped, she looked at him for the first time. Eyes blue, but hard, like river ice. You're safe now, he said quietly. Ain't nobody cumin through that door unless I let him. Her voice came thin, like wind through grass. You shouldn't have brought me here. Silas frowned. You'd rather stayed in the dirt? She didn't answer, just stared into the fire, lips trembling. After a while, she whispered, they always come back. He didn't ask who they were, not yet. He knew better than to force the truth out of the wounded. Some stories need to bleed at their own pace. Ours passed. The storm outside raged itself empty, leaving the cabin wrapped in mist. He boiled coffee, set down bread, poured water into a tin cup. She didn't touch it. He tried again. Name's Silas Vane. Used to run cattle west of the Pecos. She hesitated, then said Ilara. Just that. No last name. All right, Ilara, he said, nodding slow. You rest. We'll talk when the sun's up. She turned her face away, but he caught her glance, sharp, searching, like she didn't believe in the idea of a man helping her without a price. Silas busied himself checking the shutters, the locks, his rifle. Every squeak made her flinch. Every gust outside made her head jerk toward the window. When night fell again, the air grew heavy. Somewhere out in that fog, a single horse cried out. Then silence. Silas set his lantern low, reached for his gun. Ilara's voice barely cut through the quiet. That sound? He nodded. I heard it. The wind shifted. For a heartbeat, he saw it, a silhouette on the ridge. Horse, still, rider watching. No movement, no light, just a shape that didn't belong. He shut the curtains, sat by the fire, and in the glow of that trembling flame, both of them understood what the other already feared, that the storm hadn't buried danger. It had led it straight to their door. Morning came slow and gray. Mist rolled through the valley like smoke from an old gun barrel. The cabin stood in silence, a small island of wood and ash, surrounded by endless wet fields. Silas Vane was already awake, sitting by the fire, sharpening his knife out of habit. Not neat. He'd been a soldier once, later a rancher, then a widower. Every man out here had worn too many names. Elara stirred beneath a wool blanket. She looked cleaner now, the grime washed from her face, hair loose around her shoulders. The firelight softened her features, but not the hollowness in her eyes. Silas handed her a tin cup of water. Drink slow. Don't want it coming back up. She sipped, cautious. Why'd you help me? He shrugged. 'Cause nobody helped me when they should have. Her gaze dropped to the scars across his hands. White, deep, uneven. Those, she said quietly. Ropes. Wires, he answered. Long story. She didn't push, but she didn't look away either. The silence between them wasn't empty now. It was alive. Charged. After a while, she said, the man who owned that farm, his name's Boyd Harker. He keeps women there. For trade. For power. Some for sport. The words came like stones dropping in water. Each one left ripples in the air. Silas leaned forward, jaw tight. You talkin' about Harker's ranch? South ridge of Morrow Creek. She nodded slowly. That's where I came from. He said he owned me, sold me to another, then changed his mind. When I ran, they chained me under that floor. Her voice trembled, but not with weakness, with rage. He keeps records, names, debts, buyers. They're written somewhere in that house. That's why they'll come back. They need those ledgers gone. Silas stared into the fire. The heat painted his face in orange scars. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, quietly, my daughter worked there. Years back. Thought she was serving tables. Never came home. Elara froze. The sound of the fire seemed to dim. What was her name? May, he said. May Vane. Her lips parted. The locket around her neck. She opened it with trembling fingers and turned it toward him. Inside, a faded photo of 3 women. The one on the left had Silas's eyes. He reached out slowly, touched the glass. His breath caught. That's her. I'm sorry, Elara whispered. She helped me escape once. They caught her. After that, they made an example of her. The silence broke with the faint sound of wind howling through the cracks. Silas closed his hand, knuckles white. Then we make sure Harker pays for every nail, every rope, every breath he ever took. Elara looked at him, not with fear, but with something close to belief. For the first time, she saw not just a stranger, but a man with a reason to fight. Outside, a hawk screamed over the valley. The clouds were clearing. The light fell on the rifle hanging above the hearth, dust-covered. But ready, Elara whispered. They'll come before nightfall. Silas nodded. Then we'll be ready by sundown. The girl who'd once hidden beneath floorboards finally sat up straight. And the man who'd buried his daughter finally found a reason to dig up his gun. By late afternoon, the wind shifted again, the kind of change an old cowboy could feel in his bones, long before the clouds even moved. Silas stood outside the cabin, watching dust rise along the far ridge. He didn't need binoculars to know what was coming. Dust like that always meant hooves. Elara saw it too. Her hand tightened around the coffee tin she was holding. They found us. Silas nodded once. They were bound to. He went inside, checked the rifle's sights, and loaded 3 shells slow enough to hear each click echo through the quiet. The girl watched him from the table, her eyes steady but her breathing shallow. You think it's him? Harker, don't ride first, Silas muttered. He sends dogs to sniff the fear out. By the time the riders reached the front gate, the sun had dropped behind the ridge, painting the sky in red and bruised purple. 3 men, dusty hats, long coats that hid their guns but not their swagger, the kind of men who smiled before pulling triggers. Silas stepped out onto the porch, rifle slung casual in one hand. The lead rider leaned forward in his saddle. Afternoon, stranger. Mighty fine patch of dirt you got here. Silas didn't blink. Ain't mine by much. Bought it cheap, that's so. The rider smirked. See, my boss says this here farm ain't up for sale. Says it was misplaced. I got papers, Silas said evenly. Sure, the rider said, but paper don't mean much when the ink was signed by the wrong hand. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. You've seen a girl, 'bout yay tall, wild eyes, likes to run. Silas's jaw flexed. Ain't seen nobody but ghosts. The man laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. He spit in the dirt and nodded to the others. Ghosts, huh? Funny thing, ghosts don't leave footprints. He turned his horse sideways and there it was. Boot prints, small, fresh, leading from the barn to the cabin porch. Elara froze behind the window, one hand over her mouth. The rider's grin turned wolfish. Tell your ghost to stay quiet next time. Silas didn't move. His finger rested near the trigger, but he waited. The man spat again, then tipped his hat. We'll be back come dawn. Make sure this land's clean of trespassers and liars. They turned and rode off slow, laughter echoing behind them like rattlesnakes in tall grass. When they were gone, Silas stood silent for a long time. The prairie felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in. Ilara stepped outside, voice low. One of them, he used to guard the cellar, the one with the scar across his jaw. Silas's eyes stayed fixed on the fading dust trail. Then he'll know I ain't bluffing next time. He shut the cabin door, slid the bolt, and blew out the lamp. Outside, thunder growled again, not from the sky this time, but from the horizon where riders carried their master's wrath straight toward them. That night, the wind refused to rest. It clawed against the cabin walls like it wanted in. Carrying the smell of rain and gunpowder memory, Silas sat at the table, cleaning his rifle while Ilara patched the window with torn burlap and nailed boards across the weakest beams. The lantern between them flickered in rhythm with the storm outside, steady, defiant. 3 of them today, Silas said, means there'll be 10 tomorrow. Ilara didn't pause, her hammering, then we'll be ready for 12. He almost smiled. The girl had steel under that fear, the kind born from too many nights chained in the dark. By midnight, they'd turned that cabin into something mean. Silas filled old whiskey bottles with lamp oil and tore strips from his coat for wicks. He lined them along the windowsill. Ilara stacked ammo tins under the cot and wrapped cloth around her wrists to keep them from tearing open again. She moved like someone who'd done this before, or who'd dreamed about doing it 1,000 times. At one point, Silas caught her staring at his old revolver on the mantel. You know how to use one? He asked. Her voice came calm. He taught me, said I'd need it someday, but not against him. Silas nodded and handed it over. Looks like someday came early. She checked the cylinder, smooth, practiced. He watched her like a proud teacher, though he'd never say it aloud. Out here, respect wasn't given with words. It was seen in silence. The rain finally broke near dawn. The world turned silver under the stormlight, and the 2 of them stood outside to breathe before the fight. Ilara looked toward the ridge, where distant thunder rolled like hooves. They'll burn it, she said. They always burn what they can't own. Then we'll give them something to remember. Silas answered. They spent the next hours reinforcing the barn and digging shallow trenches near the fence. Every strike of the shovel brought up old roots and old ghosts. Once, Silas found a rusted horseshoe buried in the dirt. He hung it upside down over the door, saying, let the luck drain where it belongs. As the sun began to sink again, the sky turned to fire. They stood side by side, breathing hard, hands blistered. The cabin looked different now, less like a refuge, more like a promise carved in wood and willpower. Ilara leaned against the post, whispering, you think we can win? Silas glanced at her, his face carved in shadow. Out here, ain't about winning. It's about who walks away still knowing their own name. For the first time, she laughed, soft, nervous, alive. When darkness came, they lit one lantern and sat quiet. Outside, coyotes howled across the fields. Inside, 2 souls waited for the kind of dawn that didn't forgive mistakes. Silas checked his rifle one last time and murmured to himself, let 'em come. And in that moment, under the hum of wind and firelight, they weren't a broken rancher and a frightened girl anymore. They were soldiers of their own redemption, building their last stand in a world that had already buried them once. The next evening came heavy and slow, like the sky was holding its breath. Silas could smell them before he saw them, dust, horse, sweat, and kerosene. He stood at the window, eyes fixed on the horizon where the world burned red. The sun was bleeding out behind a wall of riders. Boyd Harker led them himself. 10 men, 2 wagons, a torch in every hand. Guess your ghosts got horses. Silas muttered. Elara stood behind him, rifle in hand, her jaw set. She looked small, but the kind of small that carried fury, not fear. That's him, she said, the man who kept the ledger, the one who called himself a god. Silas looked at her once, slow and steady. You ready? She nodded. I've been ready since the cellar. They waited. The first shot came from the ridge, a warning crack that split the silence like glass. Then the world erupted. Bullets tore through the porch posts. Wood splintered. Dust and smoke filled the air. Silas ducked low, fired back through the window, hit one rider clean off his horse. The man crumpled in the dirt, torch tumbling into the grass. Flames licked upward, hungry for wood and vengeance. Lanterns, Silas shouted. Elara grabbed one of the makeshift firebombs they'd built and hurled it out the door. It burst into light, scattering the attackers. One of Harker's men screamed as fire climbed his coat. The horses panicked, bolting through the dark, but Harker kept coming. He rode forward slow, face lit orange by the flames, calm as a preacher at a funeral. His rifle rested easy in his hand. Vain, he bellowed. You took something that belongs to me. Silas fired back. She ain't a thing, Harker, she's the proof. You ain't a man. The old rancher laughed, low and cruel. You think one cabin and one girl's gonna stop me? I built this valley, boy. You're squatting on my bones. Another shot rang out, Illyris this time. The bullet grazed Harker's shoulder. His smile vanished. He raised his rifle and fired through the window. The bullet ripped through Silas's sleeve, drawing blood but missing bone. Smoke filled the cabin. Silas coughed, half blind, still firing. The walls trembled with each blast. Ilara darted to reload, fingers shaking but precise. A shadow appeared at the door, one of Harker's men with a shotgun. Silas swung his rifle like a club, cracked the man across the skull, and sent him tumbling backward into the firelight outside. Back window, he shouted, "Go!" Ilara ran to the rear wall, broke the latch, and climbed out into the mud. Rain started to fall, soft at first, then harder, as if the heavens themselves were picking sides. Silas followed her out, rolling behind a trough. The air stank of gunpowder and rain-soaked earth. Harker stood in the open now, coat drenched, rifle raised. "It ends tonight, Vane." Silas rose from behind the trough, eyes locked. "You're right," he charged. The two men collided in the mud, fists and fury. Harker's gun went off wild, grazing Silas's shoulder again. Silas headbutted him, slammed him down, and grabbed a hammer from the mud, the same hammer he'd used to free Ilara's chains. Harker's eyes widened. Wait, the hammer fell once, twice. The third strike broke the storm open. Thunder roared. Rain poured. Harker went still. Silas stumbled back, chest heaving, covered in mud and blood and redemption. Elra stood behind him, rifle lowered, eyes glassy but unbroken. "It's done," she whispered. Silas looked at the fire dying in the rain. Not yet. He walked back into the cabin, found the ledger under a loose board, and tossed it into the flames. The ink hissed, black smoke curling toward the rafters. By the time the storm eased, the cabin stood smoking, half burned, half saved. Ilara stepped beside him, trembling but proud. "We survived." Silas nodded, staring at the sunrise bleeding through the rain. "No, girl, we began." When the rain finally stopped, the world smelled like gunsmoke and forgiveness. Ash drifted across the wet grass. The cabin's roof still hissed where embers met water. Silas stood in the doorway, shoulders slumped, shirt torn, and slick with blood that wasn't all his. He looked like a man who had wrestled with the devil and left. The grave opened behind him. Ilara moved slowly through the wreckage. Her bare feet pressed black footprints into the mud. She picked up the locket she'd dropped in the chaos, the one with May's photo inside, and wiped it clean with trembling fingers. Then she pressed it into Silas's hand. "She'd be proud," she whispered. Silas didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the ridge, where the last of Harker's men lay motionless under the dawn light. Birds had already returned, crows, greedy and patient. He holstered his revolver, exhaled hard. "No graves for them," he said quietly, "just dirt and rain." Ilara watched him gather shovels, his movements slow but certain. She joined without a word. Together they buried the bodies on the far edge of the property, not for mercy, but for peace. When it was done, Silas drove a single stake into the ground. No name, no marker. The rain turned, it dark as pitch. By noon, the sky began to clear. Shafts of sunlight cut through the smoke, turning the valley gold. Ilara stood by the cabin, arms wrapped around herself. Shivering though, the air was warm. Silas walked up behind her, handed her his coat. "This place," she said softly. "It can be more than what it was." He nodded. "It already is." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind was gentle now, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine instead of blood. In the quiet, the house no longer looked broken, just unfinished, waiting to be rebuilt by hands that had earned it. Silas reached for the hammer, the same one that had ended Harker's reign and freed a chained soul, and set it on the windowsill. "Every nail we drive from here on," he said, "ain't for defense. It's for life." Ilara smiled faintly. "Then let's start with the door." They worked side by side until the shadows stretched long again. The porch boards creaked, the hinges sang, and when the door finally hung straight, Silas looked at it and saw something he hadn't seen in years, a beginning dot as the sun dipped below the ridge. Rainwater dripped steady from the eaves, each drop catching the fading light like silver coins. Silas took one last look at the valley, his valley now, and said quietly, "This farm ain't cursed anymore. It's cleansed." And somewhere beyond the horizon, thunder rolled again, not a warning this time, but a promise. By sundown, the world had gone still again, the kind of still that only comes after justice has spoken. Smoke from the ruined barn drifted up into a red sky, curling like the last prayer of the damned. Silas stood out front, coat slung over one shoulder. The girl beside him, two souls carved from the same storm. Don't lawmen came, no witnesses, just the wind and the truth left behind. The prairie had a memory that remembered the screams that once echoed across it, the chains rattling beneath its soil, and now the sound of those chains breaking. Silas Vane didn't speak much after that. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to. The land spoke for him, the repaired door, the planted seeds, the smoke curling from a new chimney instead of a burning one. Ilara stayed. She tended the animals, mended the fences, painted over the bullet holes, but left one a reminder above the hearth. Sometimes, at dawn, Silas would catch her staring at it, eyes soft, as if remembering that freedom always comes at a cost. They never talked about Harker again. Some stories deserve an ending, not a retelling. But the people in the valley whispered. They said a man bought a cursed farm for $1 and turned it into a sanctuary. Said a girl rose from the cellar like a ghost set free. Said the rain that fell that night washed more than blood, it washed the past clean, and maybe they were right, because on that frontier, justice didn't come from courts or sheriffs. It came from the hands of those who'd already lost everything. The camera would pull back now wide over the plains. The rebuilt cabin, standing firm against the dusk, the light of one lantern flickering in its window like a heartbeat. And if you listen close, you can almost hear the narrator's voice cut through the wind. Out here, the frontier, don't forgive. But it never forgets. If this story struck you deep, if you believe some things still deserve to be made right, then ride with us again. Like, share, tell your own tale of justice. The wind whistles. The screen fades to amber light and dust. The story ends, but the legend stays riding.